Clara Thompson drew in a breath of the crisp morning air as she stood outside the small diner nestled on the corner of Main Street. The sun was just beginning to peek over the rooftops, casting a warm golden hue across the pavement. The familiar sounds of the bustling American town slowly started to awaken: distant laughter, the rumble of engines, and the soft chatter of early risers. With a smile playing on her lips, she pushed the door open, the bell above jingling cheerfully to announce her arrival. Inside, the diner was a cozy haven, filled with the comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon. Clara had been working here for over a decade, and every corner of the place felt like home. She quickly set to work, flipping the sign to open and powering on the coffee machine. As the rich aroma filled the room, she began arranging the tables, placing the salt and pepper shakers just so. Her mind wandered to the familiar faces she would see today, the regulars who brought life to the diner. "Morning, Clara," called out a cheerful voice from the kitchen. It was Helen, the cook, her hands already busy with the morning orders. Clara waved back, feeling grateful for the camaraderie they shared. "Hey, Helen, what's on the menu today?" Clara asked, knowing she would soon be serving up the diner's famous pancakes and fluffy omelets. "Same as always. You know the drill," Helen replied with a grin. "But save some of that coffee for me, will you?" Clara chuckled softly, pouring a cup of coffee and placing it on the counter for Helen. Just as she turned back to the dining area, the door swung open, revealing a figure that always brought a smile to her face: Mr. Johnson. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson," Clara greeted, her voice warm and inviting. He walked in with a slight shuffle, but his eyes sparkled with a youthful energy that belied his years. "Ah, Clara, a fine morning it is indeed," he replied, his deep voice rich with warmth. Mr. Johnson was an elderly black man, and his presence in the diner was as comforting as the coffee that Clara served. He had been coming here for as long as she could remember, often occupying the same booth by the window. Clara moved to his table, her notepad in hand. "The usual today?" she asked, already anticipating his order. "Of course. 2 eggs over easy, crispy bacon, and a side of toast, please," he said, settling into the booth with an ease that suggested this was his sanctuary. As she scribbled down his order, Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie with Mr. Johnson. Their conversations were often filled with laughter and wisdom, and he had become more than just a customer. He was a friend. "Did you do any more painting this week?" Clara asked, knowing that Mr. Johnson was an artist in his spare time. He often shared stories of his youth, filled with vibrant colors and bold strokes that brought his memories to life. "Ah, my dear, I'm afraid the canvas has been lonely lately," he replied, a hint of sadness creeping into his voice. "Life has a way of distracting us from our passions, doesn't it?" Clara nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. I've been dreaming of traveling the world, but life always seems to get in the way. I want to see Paris, maybe even the mountains in Peru." Mr. Johnson leaned back in his seat, regarding her with a knowing smile. "Dreams are meant to be pursued, Clara. Don't let the mundane hold you back. Life is too short for that." She felt a warm glow spread through her at his encouragement. "You're right. One day, I'll pack my bags and go." Their conversation flowed effortlessly, weaving between dreams and memories, laughter and shared moments. Clara loved hearing Mr. Johnson's tales of his youth, stories of love and loss, and the lessons he had learned along the way. He had a way of making her feel like she could conquer anything, and she cherished their time together. But as she served him his meal, a fleeting shadow crossed Mr. Johnson's face. Clara paused, noticing he seemed lost in thought, staring out the window at the world beyond. She brushed it off, attributing it to a moment of reflection, but a sense of unease settled in her stomach. Something felt different today, like an unspoken weight hung in the air between them. "Everything all right, Mr. Johnson?" she asked, concern creeping into her voice. "You seem a bit distant." He blinked, returning his gaze to her, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something. Fear, perhaps? But it was gone as quickly as it had come, replaced by his usual warmth. Just thinking about the passage of time, my dear, he said softly. It has a way of sneaking up on us, doesn't it? Clara nodded, her heart aching with empathy. Yes, it does. But let's not think about that today. Let's enjoy your breakfast. As they finished their meal, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She laughed and chatted with Mr. Johnson, but a lingering sense of worry settled in her chest. When he finally stood to leave, she felt a pang of reluctance. Take care, Mr. Johnson. I'll see you tomorrow, right? She asked, hoping to dispel the unease that had taken root. Of course, Clara. I wouldn't miss it for the world, he replied, his smile reassuring her, even if fleetingly. With a wave, he stepped out into the bustling street, the door jingling behind him. As Clara cleaned up the table, she couldn't shake the feeling that today had been different. The chatter of the diner faded into the background, replaced by her thoughts swirling around Mr. Johnson. Why had he seemed so lost? What had been weighing on him? She pushed the thoughts aside, determined to focus on her work, but a small seed of worry had been planted in her mind. The day wore on, with regulars coming and going, but Clara found herself glancing at the clock more often than usual, waiting for the next day when she would see Mr. Johnson again. As she wiped down the counter and filled coffee cups, she couldn't help but feel that their bond was about to be tested in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. With every passing moment, she hoped that tomorrow would bring back the familiar warmth of their conversations, the comfort of shared stories. But deep down, she sensed that change was on the horizon, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it would alter everything she thought she knew about Mr. Johnson and their friendship. Clara Thompson stood behind the counter of the diner, her heart heavy as she stared at the empty booth where Mr. Johnson usually sat. The familiar sounds of sizzling bacon and clinking dishes felt strangely muted without his warm presence. She poured herself a cup of coffee, its aroma a comforting reminder of the morning routine they shared. Yet, today felt different. His absence echoed through the diner, leaving a void that was hard to ignore. "Hey, Clara, you look like you've seen a ghost," called out Betty, a regular customer, as she entered the diner. Her bright red lipstick and floral dress contrasted starkly with Clara's subdued demeanor. "Everything okay? Just missing Mr. Johnson," Clara replied softly, her eyes drifting to the empty booth. "He didn't come in yesterday." Betty raised an eyebrow, concern replacing her usual cheerfulness. "Oh, that's unusual. You know he comes in like clockwork. Maybe he's just under the weather." "Yeah, maybe," Clara said, though a knot of worry twisted in her stomach. She busied herself with wiping down the counter, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over her. The diner buzzed with the morning crowd, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the last conversation she had with Mr. Johnson. He had seemed distracted, lost in thought, and that image lingered uncomfortably in her mind. As the day wore on, Clara served coffee and pancakes to other customers, but her heart wasn't in it. She couldn't help but glance at the clock every few minutes, hoping to see the familiar figure of Mr. Johnson entering the diner. But as the hours passed, her hope dwindled. By the time the lunch rush had quieted, Clara felt a pang of anxiety creeping in. She approached Betty again, who was finishing her meal. "Betty, have you seen Mr. Johnson around? I mean, outside of here?" Betty shook her head. "No, dear. He's usually here by now. Are you worried about him?" "I am," Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He means a lot to me. He's been coming here for over a decade. Clara, you should go check on him. What if he needs help?" Betty suggested, her eyes filled with concern. "You know where he lives, right?" Clara nodded but hesitated. The thought of intruding on Mr. Johnson's privacy made her uneasy, but the weight of his absence felt unbearable. After a few more hours of work, she decided she couldn't wait any longer. She needed to know he was okay. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara made her way to Mr. Johnson's neighborhood. The streets were quiet, the only sounds being the rustling leaves and the distant hum of cars. She parked in front of his small, quaint house, her heart pounding in her chest. The porch light was off, and the windows appeared dark. Clara stepped out of her car and walked up to the front door, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. She hesitated for a moment before knocking softly. The sound felt loud in the quiet of the evening. She waited, holding her breath, but there was no answer. "Mr. Johnson?" she called softly, her voice trembling. "It's Clara. Are you home?" Silence hung in the air. She knocked again, a little louder this time, but still nothing. A wave of disappointment washed over her. Maybe he really was unwell, or perhaps he had gone to stay with family. Just as she was about to turn away, she noticed something strange. The front yard was overgrown, the grass needing a trim, and the flower beds that Mr. Johnson usually tended to were wild with weeds. Clara's heart sank further. Something felt off. She reached for the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked, but to her surprise, it turned easily in her hand. "Mr. Johnson?" she called again, stepping inside cautiously. The air was thick with dust, and the dim light from the setting sun barely illuminated the living room. Everything seemed untouched, yet abandoned. It was a stark contrast to the warm, inviting atmosphere she remembered. As she moved further inside, Clara's heart raced. The furniture was covered with white sheets, and the walls were lined with photographs of a life well lived. Mr. Johnson at family gatherings, him holding a paintbrush, and one of him smiling with a woman who must have been his late wife. Tears stung her eyes as she took in the space that felt so empty, so devoid of life. "Mr. Johnson?" she called again, her voice trembling. She wandered toward the kitchen, where the sunlight filtered through the grime-covered windows, illuminating a layer of dust on the countertops. The smell of old wood and forgotten meals hung in the air. Clara felt a lump in her throat. She turned back, feeling lost in the home that once felt so warm and welcoming. As she stepped back into the living room, she noticed a small table filled with scattered papers and old paintbrushes. Her heart raced as she sifted through the items, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain his absence. Among the clutter, she found an old sketchbook. Opening it, she was greeted by a collection of beautiful drawings, each one a glimpse into Mr. Johnson's soul. "Wow," she whispered to herself, tracing the lines of a portrait of a young girl with a wide smile, which looked strikingly like him, and another of a vibrant landscape that seemed to capture the essence of a place filled with hope and longing. As she flipped through the pages, she could almost hear his voice narrating the stories behind each drawing. But as she reached the last page, her breath hitched. There, scrawled in his familiar handwriting, were words that sent chills down her spine. "If I'm gone, remember me not for my absence, but for the stories we shared." A sob escaped her throat as she realized the weight of those words. What had happened to him? Why would he leave such a message? Clara felt a mix of sadness and confusion. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She pulled it out, her heart racing as she saw an unknown number flashing on the screen. Hesitating for a moment, she answered, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello?" she said, her voice shaking. "Clara," came a gravelly voice on the other end. "You need to listen carefully. Mr. Johnson is in trouble." "What do you mean? Who is this?" Clara's mind raced as fear coursed through her veins. "There are things about his past that he never shared with you. He's in hiding, but you need to find him. Time is running out." Before she could respond, the line went dead, leaving her standing alone in the dimly lit living room, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. Mr. Johnson was in trouble, and she had to uncover the truth. Clara Thompson stood outside the small, faded diner, her heart beating with a mix of determination and apprehension. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement as she took a deep breath, steeling herself for the challenge ahead. She had spent the last few weeks pondering Mr. Johnson's absence, haunted by the memories of their conversations and the warmth of his smile. Today, she would take the first step toward uncovering the truth. As she walked through the neighborhood, she felt the weight of each step. The streets were filled with the usual sounds of life, children laughing, cars passing, and the distant hum of a lawnmower, but Clara's mind was focused. She approached the first house, an old brick structure with peeling paint, and knocked on the door. A middle-aged woman answered, her expression curious. "Hello, I'm Clara. I work at the diner on Main Street. I'm looking for Mr. Johnson. Have you seen him?" The woman's brow furrowed as she hesitated. "Mr. Johnson? I haven't seen him in a while. I used to see him walking around, talking to people. He was always so friendly. Do you know anything about where he might have gone?" Clara pressed, her heart racing. She could feel the knot in her stomach tightening. The woman shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry, dear. I know he lost his wife a few years back. That was hard on him. He was a gentle soul, kept to himself mostly after that." Clara thanked her and moved on, her mind racing. It was clear that Mr. Johnson had a life filled with sorrow, a life that had shaped him into the man she knew. She walked to the next house, a bright yellow cottage with flowers blooming in the front yard, and knocked again. An elderly gentleman opened the door, his face lined with age and wisdom. "Can I help you, young lady?" "Hi, I'm Clara. I'm trying to find Mr. Johnson. He's been missing, and I'm worried about him." The man's expression shifted, and he stepped back slightly, inviting her in. "Come in, dear. You're not the first to ask about him. He was a good man, always had a story or two to share." As they talked, Clara learned more about Mr. Johnson's life. The man recounted tales of Mr. Johnson's youth, his passion for art, and the love he had for his late wife. Clara felt a deepening empathy for him, understanding now that his absence was not just a personal loss for her, but a void in the community. "He used to tell me how much he missed her," the old man continued, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "But he also spoke of how he wanted to honor her memory through his art. I remember him saying that love never dies, it just transforms." Clara nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I wish I had known him better. I only served him breakfast every day." The gentleman placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You're a good person for caring so much. Have you tried reaching out to his family?" "Family?" Clara echoed. "I didn't know he had any." "Ah, yes, he mentioned a niece a few times. I believe she lives in a different state. If you're truly concerned, you might want to see if you can find her." Clara thanked him and stepped back into the bright sunlight, her heart heavy yet hopeful. She had learned more in that short visit than she had in weeks of fretting. The thought of reaching out to Mr. Johnson's family sparked a flicker of determination within her. She would not give up on him. As she continued her search, Clara's mind spun with possibilities. She walked to the public library, hoping to find any records or information about Mr. Johnson's family. The librarian, an elderly woman with glasses perched on her nose, listened intently as Clara explained her quest. "Mr. Johnson, you say? I remember him well. Always came in to read the newspaper and look at the art books. Let me see what I can find," she said, shuffling off to the back room. While the librarian searched, Clara browsed the shelves, her fingers brushing against the spines of books. She felt a connection to the stories within those pages, tales of love, loss, and resilience echoing the life of Mr. Johnson. She wondered how many stories he had yet to share with her. After a few minutes, the librarian returned with a small stack of documents. "I found a few things. It seems Mr. Johnson has a niece named Sarah. She lives in a town about 2 hours from here. Would you like her contact information?" Clara's heart raced. "Yes, please. That would be wonderful." The librarian scribbled down the information, and Clara clutched the paper tightly. She thanked the librarian profusely before stepping back into the fresh air, her resolve stronger than ever. She had a lead, and she wouldn't let it slip away. That evening, after finishing her shift at the diner, Clara sat at her small kitchen table, the paper with Sarah's information laid out before her. The weight of the moment pressed upon her, and she hesitated, her fingers hovering above the phone. What if Sarah didn't know where Mr. Johnson was? What if she wouldn't care? The doubts swirled in her mind, but she couldn't let fear hold her back. Mr. Johnson deserved to be found. With a deep breath, Clara dialed the number. The phone rang several times before a voice answered, warm yet cautious. "Hello. Hi, is this Sarah?" My name is Clara Thompson. I'm a waitress at the diner in town, and I'm looking for your uncle, Mr. Johnson. I'm really worried about him." There was a pause on the other end, and Clara could almost hear the gears turning in Sarah's mind. "Mr. Johnson? I haven't spoken to him in a while." "What do you mean you're worried?" Clara explained everything. The long absence, her daily interactions with Mr. Johnson, and the stories he had shared. As she spoke, she felt a bond forming with Sarah, a connection over their shared concern for a man they both cared about. "I didn't realize he had become so isolated," Sarah finally said, her voice laced with sadness. "He was always so strong, so resilient. I thought he was doing okay after my aunt passed." Clara could sense the regret in Sarah's words. "I believe he was trying to cope, but I think he needs help now. I'd like to help him if I can." "Thank you for caring," Sarah replied, her voice softening. "I'll drive down tomorrow. Maybe we can find him together." Clara felt a rush of hope. "That sounds perfect. I'll be at the diner in the morning. We can talk more then." After they hung up, Clara leaned back in her chair, a mixture of relief and anticipation flooding her. Tomorrow, she would finally have help in her search for Mr. Johnson. The thought of seeing him again, of finding him safe, filled her with purpose. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with possibilities. What if Mr. Johnson had been in trouble? What if he needed her help more than she realized? She had grown to care for him deeply, and the idea of him being lost or alone was unbearable. In the early hours of the morning, she finally drifted off, but her dreams were filled with images of Mr. Johnson, his laughter, his stories, and the warmth of his presence. She awoke just before dawn, the sunlight filtering through her window, illuminating her path forward. As Clara prepared for the day, she felt a sense of clarity. She was no longer just a waitress serving breakfast. She was a friend, an ally determined to find a man who had unknowingly woven himself into the fabric of her life. She would do everything in her power to bring him back, no matter the obstacles that lay ahead. With her heart set on the task at hand, Clara opened the door to a world buzzing with possibility. Today would mark a new beginning, not just for her, but for Mr. Johnson, too. Together, they would uncover the truth, and Clara was ready to fight for him with every ounce of her being. Clara Thompson stood outside the local art gallery, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement. She had decided to delve deeper into Mr. Johnson's life, a journey that had taken her to unexpected places. The once familiar diner felt empty without him, and she was determined to uncover the layers of his existence that remained hidden from her for so long. As she stepped inside the gallery, the cool air embraced her like a refreshing breeze. Clara was met by the scent of polished wood and the faint echo of whispered conversations. The walls were adorned with vibrant paintings, each a testament to struggles, dreams, and the resilience of the human spirit. Clara's heart raced as she recognized Mr. Johnson's signature style, bold strokes paired with an emotional depth that resonated with her own experiences. One painting in particular caught her eye, a large canvas depicting a solitary figure standing against a backdrop of stormy skies. The figure's posture was one of defiance, yet there was a sense of vulnerability in its stance. Clara felt a lump form in her throat as she studied the piece, realizing it encapsulated the essence of Mr. Johnson himself. He had always spoken of storms in life, how they could either drown you or help you find the strength to rise above. "Beautiful, isn't it?" A voice interrupted her reverie. Clara turned to find an elderly woman standing beside her, her eyes sparkling with appreciation. "Yes," Clara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know he was an artist." The woman nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Mr. Johnson was one of our finest. He poured his heart into every brushstroke. His work tells stories that need to be heard." Clara swallowed hard, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. "I've been looking for him. He hasn't been around for weeks." The woman's expression shifted, a hint of concern crossing her features. "That's troubling. I heard he was planning a comeback exhibition. He was so excited. But then, well, life can be unpredictable. Do you know where he might be?" Clara pressed, desperation creeping into her tone. The woman shook her head slowly. I wish I did, dear. He's always been a private man, but he has a good heart. He wouldn't just disappear without reason. Clara felt a surge of determination. She needed to uncover the truth. He means a lot to me. I just want to make sure he's okay. The woman reached out, placing a comforting hand on Clara's shoulder. Then you must keep searching. Sometimes the answers are hidden in the past. With that, Clara turned her attention back to the paintings, now viewing them through a different lens. She wandered through the gallery, each piece revealing a layer of Mr. Johnson's soul. There was one painting that depicted a vibrant street scene, filled with life and color, a stark contrast to the somber, stormy skies of the previous canvas. Clara recognized the streets from their conversations, the very ones where he had lived, loved, and faced adversity. As she continued to absorb the artwork, Clara overheard snippets of conversation from a nearby group. They spoke of Mr. Johnson with reverence, recalling his exhibitions and the way his art had inspired countless individuals. A young man shared, "He taught me that art isn't just about beauty. It's about conveying truth, even when it's hard to swallow." Clara's heart swelled with appreciation for the man who had become such an integral part of her life. The thought of him being in distress gnawed at her. She wondered if he had faced challenges that had driven him away. The more she learned, the more she felt a connection to his struggles, a bond that transcended the confines of their diner conversations. After a while, Clara made her way to a small information desk at the back of the gallery. An art curator, a middle-aged man with glasses perched on his nose, was flipping through a stack of papers. "Excuse me," she began, her voice steady. "I'm looking for information about Mr. Johnson. I heard he was supposed to have an exhibition soon." The curator looked up, a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. "Ah, Mr. Johnson. Yes, he was indeed scheduled for a comeback. His work was to be featured next month. It would have been a significant event, given his history." "Do you know what happened to him?" Clara asked, her heart racing. The curator sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to recall. "I haven't seen him in weeks. He was so passionate about this exhibition, but then he just vanished. It's unlike him. I'm worried." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you think he's in trouble?" "It's possible. Artists often carry the weight of their pasts. Maybe he needed time to gather his thoughts," the curator suggested, his voice tinged with sympathy. Clara knew there had to be more. "Could you tell me about his past? Anything that might help me understand?" The curator hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Mr. Johnson's life has not been easy. He lost his wife a few years ago, and that took a toll on him. His art was his refuge, but it also served as a reminder of what he lost. There are whispers about his earlier life too, some that he has kept hidden. He was once involved in a significant art movement, but the details are sketchy." Clara's mind raced with this new information. It was clear that Mr. Johnson's world was far more complex than she had ever imagined. "What kind of movement?" she inquired. "An underground collective focused on social issues, civil rights, and the struggles of the Black community. His work was deeply political at one point, but he shifted to more personal themes after his wife passed. It's like he found solace in portraying the intimate battles people face." Clara felt a sense of urgency wash over her. She needed to find him, to understand not just the man who served as her mentor, but the artist who had poured his heart and soul into his work. "Do you have any suggestions on where I might find him?" she asked, desperation creeping into her voice. The curator shook his head, a frown on his face. "Unfortunately, I don't, but you might want to check with some of his old friends or other artists from that movement. They may know more about his whereabouts or his plans." "Thank you," Clara said, her resolve strengthening. "I'll do just that." As she left the gallery, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on her shoulders. She had entered seeking answers, but what she found was a deeper understanding of the man she cared for. Mr. Johnson was not just a kind-hearted patron of her diner. He was a complex individual with a past that shaped his present. The sun dipped lower on the horizon as Clara made her way through the town, her footsteps echoing her determination. She would dig into Mr. Johnson's life, uncover the stories that had been left untold, and she would be relentless in her quest to find him. The diner, the art, the community, they were all pieces of a puzzle, and she was determined to put them together. With newfound purpose, Clara couldn't help but feel that she was beginning to understand not just Mr. Johnson, but herself as well. She was ready to embrace whatever truths lay ahead, even if they were difficult to grasp. In the depths of her heart, she knew that their bond was worth the search, and she would not stop until she found him. Clara Thompson stood at the entrance of the diner, her heart heavy with worry for Mr. Johnson. The past weeks had felt like an eternity without his warm smile and gentle wisdom. Determined not to let despair take hold, she took a deep breath and rallied her resolve. If Mr. Johnson was out there, she needed to find him. She quickly gathered her supplies, a stack of flyers, a marker, and her phone, ready to spread the word. The diner was quiet that morning, the only sounds coming from the whirring coffee machine and the occasional clatter of dishes. She knew she would need the community's help, so she grabbed the first flyer she had prepared, which read, "Missing, Mr. Johnson. Last seen on insert date. Please help." Below, she had included her contact information. Clara felt a flicker of hope as she envisioned the townspeople coming together to help her. Clara headed to the nearby park, a popular gathering spot in the town. As she walked, she couldn't help but think of all the stories Mr. Johnson had shared with her over the years. He had been more than just a customer, he had been a mentor, a friend. She recalled how he had encouraged her to pursue her dreams, often reminding her that life was too short for regrets. The thought of him alone, possibly in danger, fueled her determination. Arriving at the park, Clara approached a group of regulars who often gathered to play chess. "Hey, everyone, can I have your attention for a moment?" she called out, her voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling inside her. The group paused their game, turning to her with curious expressions. "Is everything okay, Clara?" asked Tom, an older gentleman with a kind face. "I wish I could say yes. I'm looking for Mr. Johnson. He's been missing for over a week now, and I need your help to find him." She held up the flyer, the ink still fresh from the printer. "If you see him or have any information, please contact me." A murmur spread through the group as they took in her words. "Mr. Johnson? The artist?" Another woman chimed in, her brow furrowing. "Yes, that's him," Clara replied, her heart racing. "He's always been there for me, and I can't just sit back and do nothing." "I'll help spread the word," Tom said, his voice firm. "He's a good man. We all owe him that much." Encouraged by their support, Clara spent the rest of the day handing out flyers, sharing Mr. Johnson's story with anyone who would listen. She posted on social media, hoping the digital world would provide leads that her small town could not. As the day turned to dusk, Clara returned home, weary but hopeful. She had done everything she could for now. All she could do was wait. A week passed, and despite her efforts, there was still no sign of Mr. Johnson. Clara felt a growing sense of dread, each day blending into the next. She had become a fixture in the diner, serving coffee and meals, but her heart was not in it. She longed for the sound of his voice, his laughter, and the wisdom that seemed to flow effortlessly from him. Then, one evening, as she was closing up the diner, her phone rang, startling her. She glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Her heart raced as she answered, "Hello, Clara?" The voice on the other end was low, almost a whisper. "I know where Mr. Johnson is." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Who is this? How do you know?" "Meet me at the cafe on Maple Street. I'll explain everything, but you have to come alone," the caller instructed before hanging up. Torn between fear and a flicker of hope, Clara felt adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had to know the truth. After locking up the diner, she made her way to the cafe, her heart pounding with every step. The streetlights flickered above her as she approached the quaint establishment, its windows glowing softly in the twilight. Inside, the cafe was dimly lit and quiet, a few patrons scattered at tables, lost in their own worlds. Clara scanned the room, her eyes landing on a cloaked figure sitting in the far corner, shrouded in shadow. The person's face was obscured, but the air around them felt heavy with secrets. "Clara," the figure called softly, gesturing for her to come closer. She hesitated for a moment, then approached slowly, her heart beating in her throat. "Are you the one who called me?" "Yes," said the figure, their voice low and deliberate. "I can tell you where to find Mr. Johnson, but you have to understand, it's not safe for him to be seen." "Why? What's happened to him?" Clara asked, her mind racing with possibilities. The figure leaned forward, the dim light catching the edge of their face. "Mr. Johnson is in hiding. There's a dangerous secret from his past that has resurfaced, and he's been protecting you from it." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of secret? He's just a retired artist. Why would anyone want to hurt him?" The figure sighed, clearly weighing their words carefully. "Mr. Johnson was once a key witness in a case involving art theft and corruption. When the people involved learned he was back in town, they started looking for him. He didn't want you to get caught in the crossfire." Clara's mind reeled. All those conversations they had shared. How could she have not seen it? "But why didn't he tell me? We've been friends for years. He wanted to keep you safe," the figure replied, their voice filled with a strange sympathy. "He thought it was better this way." Clara felt a swell of emotion rise within her, a mix of anger and confusion. "I can't believe this. I need to talk to him. He deserves to explain himself." The figure shook their head, an urgency in their demeanor. "You can't. Not yet. He's trying to gather evidence to expose the truth behind the art theft ring. If you're seen with him, it could put both of you at risk." Clara's heart sank, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "So what do I do now?" "Help him," the figure said, their tone resolute. "He needs someone he can trust, and you're that person. Together, you can bring this to light, but you have to be careful." Clara nodded slowly, a newfound determination rising within her. "I'll do whatever it takes to help him. He's more than just a customer to me. He's family." As she left the cafe, the weight of the world felt heavier on her shoulders, but she was ready to embrace the challenge. She had to find Mr. Johnson, to stand by him, and together they would confront the past that had haunted him for too long. Clara's heart raced with a mix of fear and resolve. She was no longer just a waitress. She was now an ally in a fight for justice, and she wouldn't back down. Clara sat at a small table in the dimly lit cafe, her heart racing as she stared at the cloaked figure across from her. The air felt thick with tension, and the figures had cast a shadow over their face, leaving only their piercing eyes visible. They leaned closer, their voice low and urgent. "Mr. Johnson isn't just a retired artist, Clara. He's a key witness in a decades-old case involving art theft and corruption." Clara's mind spun with the revelation. Mr. Johnson, the gentle man who had shared countless breakfasts with her, had a past shrouded in danger and intrigue. She shook her head, trying to process the weight of the words. "What do you mean? I don't understand. Why would he?" "Because he's protecting you," the figure interrupted. "He was involved in something that could put your life at risk if it ever came to light. That's why he's gone into hiding." Her stomach twisted into knots. "But how do you know this? Who are you?" Clara's voice trembled, a mixture of fear and disbelief flooding her senses. "I'm an undercover detective," the figure revealed, leaning back slightly. "My name is Detective Harris. I've been working on this case for years, trying to gather enough evidence to bring down a network of corrupt art dealers. Mr. Johnson witnessed a crime that could expose them, but they've been looking for him ever since. He didn't want to involve you, but he also knew he couldn't stay away forever." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "He told me about his past, but he never mentioned anything like this." She felt a wave of emotions crash over her. Betrayal, confusion, and an overwhelming need to protect Mr. Johnson. "Where is he? Is he safe?" Detective Harris's expression softened slightly. "As safe as he can be for now. He's in a secure location, but we need to act fast. The longer he stays hidden, the more dangerous it becomes. There are people who will stop at nothing to silence him. Just then, Clara's phone vibrated on the table, cutting through the tense atmosphere. She glanced at the screen and her heart leaped. It was Mr. Johnson's number. "It's him," she exclaimed, her hands shaking as she answered the call. "Mr. Johnson? Clara?" His voice came through, shaky but clear, sending a rush of relief through her. "I'm so sorry to call you like this, but I need you to listen carefully. Where are you? Are you okay?" Clara's voice was barely above a whisper, her eyes darting to Detective Harris, who nodded reassuringly. "I'm safe for now, but I have to remain hidden until I can expose the truth behind everything. You need to promise me you won't try to find me." "It's not safe," he urged, his tone urgent. "But I can't just sit here and do nothing." "You're in danger, Mr. Johnson," she protested, her heart aching at the thought of him alone and scared. "I'm doing this to protect you," he insisted, his voice firm. "You have to trust me. There are people who would hurt you if they knew how close you are to me. I can't let that happen." Tears prickled at the corners of Clara's eyes. "But you're my friend. I can't just abandon you." "I know," he replied softly, "and that's why I'm asking you to be strong. I've been trying to keep you out of this mess, but I need your help now. They're coming for me, and I need you to be my eyes and ears. Will you do that?" Clara nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Yes, I will. Just tell me what to do." "Detective Harris is with you, right?" Mr. Johnson asked. "He's been working to protect you both. Follow his lead. I trust him." Clara looked at Harris, who was listening intently. "I promise I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice steady with resolve. "Good. Just remember, stay vigilant. Don't trust anyone else." "I'll be in touch when I can," he said, and the line went dead. Clara lowered her phone, feeling a mix of determination and dread. "He's scared, but he's willing to fight," she said to Harris, who nodded in agreement. "It's a good sign," he said. "That means he's ready to take action. But we need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more chance there is of them finding him first." "What do we do?" Clara asked, her mind racing with thoughts of how to help Mr. Johnson. Suddenly, she felt a surge of purpose. "We have to get him out of this situation." "Yes, but we need a plan," Harris replied. "We'll need to gather evidence and ensure he has the protection he needs. It's not just about finding him. It's about taking down the people who want to silence him." Clara took a deep breath, focusing on the task ahead. "I'll do whatever it takes to help him. He's been there for me all these years. Now it's my turn to be there for him." Harris smiled faintly, appreciating her resolve. "That's the spirit. First, we need to identify anyone who might be involved in this corruption. We can start by interviewing people who have been in contact with him in the past. We'll also need to dig into any art sales he was involved in before he disappeared." Clara nodded, her mind racing through the memories of their conversations. "He mentioned a few names. People from the gallery. I can start there." "Good. We'll need to act fast," Harris said, pulling out a notepad. "Write down everything you remember about those conversations. And keep your phone close. I'll be in touch with updates." As Clara began jotting down notes, a sense of urgency propelled her forward. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but also a newfound strength. Mr. Johnson had always believed in her, and now it was her turn to believe in him. "Clara," Harris said, looking her in the eye, "I know this is a lot to take in, but you're not alone in this. We'll get through it together." She met his gaze, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "I won't let him down. He's more than just a friend to me. He's family." The detective nodded, sensing the gravity of Clara's commitment. "Then let's get to work. We have a lot to uncover, and the clock is ticking." As they began to plan their next steps, Clara felt a sense of purpose flooding her veins. She was no longer just a waitress in a diner. She was now a part of something bigger, a fight for justice and the truth behind a man she cared deeply for. With every word she wrote down, she felt her bond with Mr. Johnson strengthening, and she knew that together, they would face whatever came next.